Right, good evening. Thank you to Mike for joining us once again. Mike, good to have you here. Mike's joining us as the Young Masons Virtual Social Extra, which we held 2 weeks ago, well, a week ago, but this will go out this week. And this is for all the questions that we didn't get time to answer during the session. So we very much appreciate you coming back. And we look forward to having you back again in the distant future with one of your many talks. It was
Thank you.
went down very well, had such a great response. So we look forward to another one. Right, we're going to start with a question from Matthew Edson from the Essex Cornerstone Club. Matthew says, all of the Masonic locations you visited, which one would you recommend we all visit?
Well, I mean, it depends what he means by Masonic location. If he means like Grand Lodges and the like, I mean, of course, I'd recommend to everybody that they go to Great Queen Street. But one of the most fascinating Masonic halls I found was Chichester. They've got a lovely collection of tracing boards down there from 200 and odd years ago. So it's quite a way. You know, down on the south coast, I did my army training there. I would recommend that. I've also been, one of the strangest places I went to as well was the Grand Lodge in Budapest, because the communist government seized all the buildings and they had to hand them back at the end, and every organisation like Masonry had to make a bid for a building, and so they were given one. So that was one with like a strange Masonic history. And I suppose I could say, when you go to the States, I was over in Massachusetts and I went to a allied Masonic degrees. It's like the Red Cross of Babylon. It's in UK, it's done with chapter robes, but the robes they wore in Ohio, in Massachusetts, sorry, were absolutely wonderful. They look like a Ben-Hur cast. So it was, depends what you go and see, but that's like Great Queen Street's good. Chichester for the tracing boards, and then just go and see foreign locations is fantastic.
And I guess there's so many of them to choose from as well. It's just knowing, I guess the question is, because you've been to so many and there's so many significant places, it really it's very much diluted across the country and especially the world. So that's a great question.
Good evening, guys. Apologies, I was struggling to get on for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, so I've just been.
No problem, Matty. We have started, so we'll carry on. Matty, your question's up next. Do you want to ask Mike that?
Yeah, this one is from me actually. And Mike, do you get involved with the 21 gun salutes in London?
No, not per se. But what I do is, because I'm the commandant of Army Cadet Music, I often get asked by the regular army to help. So we provided corps of drums to the Tower of London, for example. I mean, my own son played there, but several cadet corps of drums, because a high standard, have played at the Tower and helped with pass-off parades, army pass-off parades and the like. And sometimes cadets are used by things like the Honourable Artillery Company on the Lord Mayor's show. So I don't get involved in the 21 gun salutes, but I certainly help to supply musicians, drummers and pipers and the like to the regular army when they need them.
And in addition to that, Mike, is this a good resume for the cadets for going on further to the band corps, for example, like Royal Artillery Band and the other bands that they've got?
Is it what, sir? Can you just?
Is it a good resume for them to get picked to do these kind of?
Oh yes, it's fantastic. It's a great opportunity. If you can imagine a youngster, you know, being allowed to play at the Tower of London. I mean, all the tourists, you know, the stereotypical Japanese tourists with cameras taking pictures of them. The kids feel absolutely wonderful. They get the opportunities to play in some really wonderful places: Sandhurst, Gibraltar, in Casemates, and in the St Michael's Cave in the middle of the rock. So my personal thing is, my crusade is for sort of youngsters who come from quite poor backgrounds in London, you know, that sort of place, and it's a really good thing for them.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Brown from Prawson Semper also says, Mike, what is the natural progression from being a RMP to join the police when you were demobbed?
Well, it was a conscious thing, really. So at 16 years old, I thought about joining the police because my uncle was a detective in Manchester, but they said, oh, there's no police cadets. So I ended up in the military police. So it was always an intention as a sort of temporary measure, really. And so I applied to the Manchester police when I was in Londonderry, and they said, oh, we're not recruiting. And a friend came out of a phone box and said, well, I've applied for the Mets. And one was in England, the other's in England, so I just thought I'll do me. And it's amazing how your life pivots on a sort of moment like that. That I could have ended up in Manchester, but because of a friend saying, "Oh, come to London," that's what happened. And then all the things that went on in London with the CCTV and Super Recognizer. So you just don't know. So a lot of army guys, particularly R&P, joined the police. The Navy used to join the fire brigade, because it's, in the Navy it's all about putting out fires, isn't it? And if you look at the rank structure in the fire brigade, it's very much naval, whereas the police is very much army.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Our next one, Mike, is from Glenn14, and he asks, how long did it take for you to write your books, Mike?
Thank you. Well, I know Glenn because he's a captain in the Army Cadets as well. So it's hard to answer that one because, for example, Sacred Secrets is a biblical one. Didn't start off as a book really. So what happened was I started to do things like the second degree tracing board, and I was talking about places like Zuccoth and Zaradatha, and I didn't know where they were, and I was mentioning people like Hiram of Biff and Hiram King of Tyre, and I didn't know who they were and how one fitted to the other. And also there's all sorts of words in there I didn't understand. One of the words in the tracing board is paid their wages in specie. So I started to look these up, and my grandmother had given me a Bible when I was 7, and I photocopied a map out of it, and I used to use this in the tracing board explanation. So, well, that's Zuccoth, that's Zaradatha, that's Tyre, wherever. And I started explaining the words. So specie means small coins, and it sort of grew out of the tracing board, became a lecture, and then from the lecture came the book. So it was probably about a 7 or 8 year run from looking up the first words and places to the book being published. Whereas with Crime and the Craft, that grew out of doing walks around London and people liking all these tales of murder, death, misery and scandal. And so that, I could probably say that took about 4 years. I'm thinking of writing another book about other interesting Masons, and for once I've got a bit of a plan, so it might take less time, because the other two have sort of been, sort of part-time, throw it together as I sit in a bar. I always find that 5 pints of Stella helps write, but I don't know about reading.
The magical Stella Artoris.
It is. It's amazing. It always seems good to me anyway. But yeah, there we go.
And how have how have the books been received, especially in the Masonic sector, but outside of that as well?
Yeah, well, one of the nicest comments about Crime and the Craft I got is on Amazon. It says it's balanced, so it's not pro-Masonry, it's not anti-Masonry. It portrays as it is. It says, look, there are some goody Masons, lots of good ones, but there's a few bad ones, and I think that's a fair assessment. And anybody who knows their ritual would know that three of the Masons bumped off the Grand Master and 12 had a good think about it. So that's 15 bad ones anyway. So we've got to admit that. So very few people get the hump about it. And that's my well, look, this is the way of it. The Sacred Secrets one, I had a lovely letter from a chap who's a vicar, but he was like the 3rd in command of the Red Cross of Constantine, and he got hold of me via the editors saying, thank you, this has been such a useful book, which I thought was nice. What makes me laugh is that the Letchworths in Great Queen Street, they'll sell Sacred Secrets, but they won't sell Crime and the Craft. But the thing is, they've raised about 50 grand for charities, the lectures on them, so they've not done bad. And ultimately, what do people want to hear about? If you watch the TV tonight, there'll be a crime drama with some forensics in it, some sex and scandal, and a virgin. So that's what I know. What people like to hear. It's entertaining, it's funny, and as I say, I'm lucky to have lived that life where I was involved in catching armed robbers and vicious, wicked people around the world. Yeah. And some people, it's just they've got to see it from the TV, and I think they like to hear it. So there are some great tales, and like I say, most of the forensic science developments have come from Masons. So they're the sort of tales it tells. The good tales, they're not all bad. Is there a few in there? Any organisation has got to be honest about itself and say there's some. So yeah, some people don't like it, but they can bugger off in mine normally.
But it makes for interesting reading anyway. Jonathan McDonald from Essex Cornerstone says, Mike, what advice do you have for someone in the police who has been told that he is part of the dodgy handshake gang?
Well, I'll get hold of a copy of my book, because then he can show all the top police officers who were Masons, like Nipper Reed, who caught the Cray twins, the very first Charles Collins, who was the very first fingerprint expert. some of the great pathologists, the founder of the flying squad, the founder of the first anti-terrorist squad commander. So I think sometimes what you need to be armed with is some information so you can be proud of what you are and say, look, these are the people who you know, I went to the flying squad office once, and they were taking the mickey. They had like a photocopy of a Masonic apron, and were saying, oh, we knew you are. And I said to this bloke, well, do you know that the two cars you've got downstairs, which are named, they're both named after the two founders of the flying squad, who are both Masons. So you really need to check your own facts before lauding it about. So I think with anything like that, with a police officer, I would be armed with those facts and things like the story I told last week of the Seddon case, where Seddon was gave the Masonic signs at the judge who was the provincial Grand Master of Surrey and got hanged. Well, I think that's important to have that in your back pocket, because then you can defeat people who've got, well, tell me a story then about where you know, where you can tell me that Masons have done something wicked, and they will have nothing, and you will have evidence to sort of shoot them down in flames. So that would be my advice.
We had a question come over Facebook from Marcus Jenkins of the Sarsen Club, which really touches on what you've just said. But he said, did you experience much negativity during your police career?
Not really. What I found is it changed. I think at one time it probably would have helped in the CID to be a Mason, possibly. By the time I was in, they sent out this letter saying, are you a Mason? You know, this was the early sort of, must have been 96, 90, I haven't long been in, and it said, are you a Mason? I am a Mason. I'm not a Mason, or I'm not prepared to say I'm a Mason or not. And you've got this letter, and it was signed by a woman deputy assistant commissioner. But within weeks, it was rescinded because there was a court hearing from Italy where they went to the European Court of Human Rights, and it was thrown out as a legal procedure. So it never took off. And then I found it all went into sort of, they didn't really care. And then most of the senior officers, in fact, all 40 senior officers, commander and above, none of them are Masons anymore.
Right.
So it doesn't help anybody. So yeah, it changed. It went from being really important to like being anti, and then to ambivalence. Really, that's how it's changed. The awful scoundrel Paddock, he was the Liberal Democrat candidate for the Mayor of London. He was a Mason at Croydon, and his uncle was a grenadier who was Tyler. And he was one of these characters who resigned from Masonry because it furthered his own career. But you know, some of us have standards, I suppose.
Absolutely. Our next one, Mike, is from James Irvine from the Sarsens Club. And he asks, Mike, what is the most interesting crime in history that fascinates you?
I suppose it's got to be Jack the Ripper, hasn't it? I mean, from a Masonic point of view, it also adds so much, because in my researches I've found there's 40 Masons involved in that case, who belong to 60 different lodges, and those Masons are there as detectives, as police officers, as coroners, as witnesses, as jurors on inquests, as owners of property where the attacks occurred, and also as suspects. And the fact that two of the main investigators involved, so what's equivalent of the detective inspector Aberline and the detective chief inspector Swanson, who is the equivalent today of like the senior investigating officer, both of them have an opinion, and who was the Ripper. So I think that's probably the most fascinating crime, because of course it remains unsolved, or was it? And I think and it also has all these Masonic twists involved in it. And I'm happy to come back and do a talk on that, or I can actually take people around Whitechapel and we can discuss it over a beer and a curry. So it's probably the best place to do it. And then we can no doubt solve it at that point. You've gone off. Mitch.
Here we go. Sorry. All I said was we could solve any crime after a couple of pints of Stella Artois.
Yeah, well, that's the CID in London, that is.
Yeah, the idea of a curry and some pints really went down well. So we'll be in touch for a joint venture next year sometime. The final question from the chat last week comes from Timmy from the Sarsen Club. He says, maybe I missed it, but what made you join Freemasonry?
Well, it involves Jack the Ripper, actually. So I was in that time in London in the sort of late 90s. When you were becoming a CID officer, you were attached to the CID, and you had to do night duty. And I was like a PC attached to the CID, and one of the detective constables, you did night duty together, and you just covered whatever crimes came up. You sort of held the fort while until the morning, until the murder scene was held, and or whatever people needed interviewing. And I ended up with a guy, and we got talking, and he said, "Oh, I'm interested in Jack the Ripper. Should we go and look at some of the scenes?" And it was a quiet night, and so we cut over to Mitre Square and places like that. So it's over. We were at Clapham, and it was over the bridges into Tower Hamlets and the city and wherever. And then we got talking, and he said, "Oh, the Freemasonry." I'd always been interested in it because I'd read the Brotherhood when I was in the army, and rather than it put me off, it sort of thought, "Oh, I'd like to join that." And he introduced me to my mother lodge in Croydon, Frederick of Unity 452. But within about 3 meetings, he'd resigned. So I was a sort of Masonic orphan in a way. But that's where it came from. So it came from being night duty CID in Clapham and doing a tour of Jack the Ripper sites.
Fantastic. It's always really interesting to hear people's stories, especially when starting, because they're so varied and like you say. How did you feel when you joined, and then after 3 meetings he did resign? Did you feel that this is something you wanted to sort of catch on to? Because a lot of the time it does take a little while for you to sort of
no, I sort of liked it straight away, really. When the 2 old chaps came to interview me before I joined, they said, "Oh, what are you good at?" And I said, "I can remember things." Because I used, in the Army SIB, there's like the equivalent of CID, that I got an A grade, and there was only 7 A's in 25 years because I could memorise the whole Theft Act and stuff like that.
Oh, right.
So that was quite useful. So I sort of thought, "Well, I like this," and I've always been interested in religious matters, and I saw these, performances with tracing boards. So I did the charge, I think, as a fellow craft, and I did the 1st degree tracing board as a master mason, and so I liked it. I liked the sort of ceremonial of it, and I sort of fell in love with it very quickly, I suppose.
Is that what keeps you interested now, Mike? The ceremony, the ritual?
Up to a point. I mean, one of my big things is I hate it when people stand there and they talk all the words, and you say to them, "What does that mean then?" And they don't know. I think Masonry's got lost. So, for example, for anybody in chapter, after the exaltation, you get these 3 lectures, and they're an absolute nightmare. People, the candidate sort of looks at everybody and says, "What the hell is that on about?" And it's transformed from being the people trying to teach the candidate it's transformed into the 3 people demonstrating they can learn a load of long words and regurgitate them. Yeah. And I just don't think that's helpful. So, I mean, for example, when I do a tracing board, 1st degree, 2nd or 3rd, I have PowerPoint. So when I say they made off towards Joppa, I put up on the screen, right, there it is, there's a map, that's where they went, and you can see it's a seaport trying to get away. If I do the 1st degree tracing board, I'll do a paragraph and I'll stop and I'll say, "Look, I think this is what I think they're trying to say to us here. These are the stories of the Bible, or this is the item we're talking about." And 2nd degree one's easy because you can show a map and say, right, the attack, right, this is the enemy forces here, this is where they were attacking from, these are the weapons they used. When he took these towns, this is the spoils of the war here. And I just think that makes people think, "Oh yeah, right, I understand that now. I understand where that's coming from." Rather than 3rd degree, especially standing in front of somebody, they regurgitate a lot of stuff, and you think, "I have no idea." Yeah. I even have like a Masonic link to Star Trek on the 3rd degree, which I won't give away here, involving Mr. Spock. But just little things that sticks in people's minds, and I think that's important. That's one of the things we've got to change. I think younger members, they want to know why, not.
So would you say, Mike, that maybe involved in some lectures describing some of these tracing boards and some of these ritual we do is probably going to be a bit more positive outcome on people learning and actually able to understand what we're doing?
I think so, because if you it's like reading a book. If you come across a word that you don't know, you should look it up in the dictionary, not skim over it. And I think a lot of people skim over it, and they say, it's like me, I could learn the Russian national anthem and sing it with gusto, but I wouldn't know what I'm singing. And I think a lot of Freemasons, they do that, and then they get a silver matchbox or whatever prize is available. And I think there's more to it than that. I think younger members, they need to, what we found, the other thing I found as well is that, of course, I do these biblical talks. If you went back 50 years, me, for example, I'm 53 years old. I had scripture lessons at school. I went to Sunday school. I went to church. I watched Ben-Hur and Samson and things like that with my grandparents, on the TV. If now the guy is 25 who joins, he hasn't seen those films. He doesn't go to Sunday school. He's got no scripture. So if I draw an analogy to the cadets, it's like somebody playing. So when we first learn the flute, you learn 3 blind mice first, and when you can play 3 blind mice, you move on to Men of Harlech. And when you can play Men of Harlech, you move on to Great Escape. And when you can play that, you move on to British Grenadiers. Each one is more complicated than the other. What we tend to do in Masonry, we suddenly jump to playing the equivalent of British Grenadiers on the flute, because the people now have not got that background knowledge. They don't know. They've never heard of King Solomon. They've never heard of these biblical stories. I mentioned the Good Samaritan in a talk once, and I don't know who he is. I mean, that's a scandal. It's a cultural scandal, really. But so Masonry, we've got to. I used to teach the Army cadets in Brixton map reading, but I used to have to teach them maths first, like how to add up, how to take away. Because there's no point trying to teach like variations in the compass if they can't add and take. So Masonry's got to recognise that people coming in now haven't got that theological knowledge that people would have had in the past, and they've got to backfill that. So when they get taught these things, particularly in chapter, which is really complex, they have some basic knowledge of the Bible to take them forward. I mean, the best place to go is a Jewish lodge or chapter. I love going there, giving a talk, because it always ends up in a big old argument and fight in the best possible taste, because they really know their stuff, and it's really good, and it's a joy to be with people who've got that knowledge. Yeah. But I think that's something we need in Masonry.
It is good, and you do hear that quite often, like talking the words, but you don't have a clue what you're speaking. So it's really ideal. Do you think it starts with a mentor, or is it something that we ought to be embracing?
But I just think the level of knowledge is so bad. You know, like one of the things I do when I do my biblical talk, one of the first things I ask everybody, and I do these in front of like 200 people sometimes, and I say, look, who knows what tie you can wear in this lodge or chapter? And you know, 99%, they're really proud to know I wear this tie. You know, I can't wear that, and I have a selection of ties. Could I wear this one here? And people are sucking into this, like, you know, oh yeah, no, you couldn't wear that. And then I say to them, okay, put that away. We know all about that. Who could put £50 on my table and for charity and say which 2 books of the Bible feature the building of King Solomon's Temple? And there's literally 5% of people know that. And I just said, well, where have we gone? Well, where have we gone wrong that everybody knows the tie rules but don't know where the origins of our ritual are? And it's shameful, really. Because there's always somebody at the door. I went to give a talk once, and an old chap said, "Oh, you can't come in here. You're wearing the wrong tie." So I started packing up all my kit. Well, I'll go home then. You know, oh no, you can't be like that. But that's the problem with Masonry. It's become a sort of administrative thing. Some people are praised, aren't they, by their knowledge of the Book of Constitutions. I mean, for God's sake, what kind of organisation, as people are proud of knowing the Rulebook, is? You know, it's a bit rubbish, really.
It's almost like the story of the morals and everything else that you're supposed to be taught in the rituals are kind of dissipated somewhat. And that is the core of Freemasonry at the end of the day, especially in the first degree as well. And it's sad that, you know, things like that go amiss sometimes. And
we just got to, I think we just got some of the words are really unusual, like peculiar doesn't mean weird, it means unique, you know, things like that. We just got to make sure that people, I often stop and say, look, I'm going to say what this word means, because the candidate's looking at you, I don't know. But so the more you can understand, and the feedback I've got is, look, that was really nice, I understood it, particularly the 3rd degree, because on the traditional history, I have the PowerPoint behind me, they get all the right words, but I'll point out, there it is, you know, there's a picture of Hymer Biff in the grave, you know, there's a picture of it, you know, the sprig of acacia, things like that. That just brings the story, you know, many days are spent in fruitless search. So I've got a picture of the Judean desert. We can see it's pretty awful, you know, no wonder they couldn't find anybody.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It's like the British, when I take people around the British Museum, when you're a child, you're dragged around the British Museum, oh, it's all rubbish, like, you know, your parents drag you around and off you go. When you join Masonry, of course, when somebody takes you around and says, look at this thing here, that was made when this part of the ritual was, you know, this story was taken. The people want to know then, don't they? Oh, I want to know that. So it's about, and I like to bring it alive, and I think that's what, and then it brings enthusiasm. But as I say, the weakest link in Masonry, in my view, is chapter, because it's so hard, theologically difficult, and we're giving people, no, we're building it on sand rather than building it on rock.
Do you think some guidelines written by yourself and injected into lodges would help the?
Well, some of them I've done. So I'll give you an example, Mitch. One of the things I did was, you you know the questions. So when you're in your first degree, some old boy, right? You got to learn these questions. You got to learn these answers. So people go away, or the sun being the centre of the, you know, the solar, and all this sort of thing, and people learn all that, and they come back and they regret, and they say, well, fantastic, very well answered, you know. All right. So what I did, I wrote some explanations as to why you first prepared to be made a Freemason in my heart. Well, so what I wrote is that is an ancient Egyptian belief. So when you were mummified, they took out your heart and they put it in a gold pot. Okay, they pulled out your brain and flung it in the bin. It's rubbish as far as I'm concerned. So that ancient belief went from Moses, because Moses, of course, was brought up as an Egyptian prince and priest. He brought that into Judaism. That belief went into Christianity. So if you go to a Holy Communion service now, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts. It's all there. Why is it not hearts? Why doesn't it cleanse the thoughts of our heads? Because hearts, that's what it's ancient Egyptian, and that's gone into Freemasonry. So I put these explanations. So it's got. So in Surrey they use it. So rather than just saying learn these words, it's got we think, and I always say I think or whatever, because it's never definite. But I give an explanation as to what that means. Why are we saying that rather than just saying it? You know, so the sun being the centre of the universe, that's bleeding obvious, isn't it? No, it wasn't bleeding obvious. 300 years ago when that was written, you could have been burnt for saying that. You know, so there were very brave men who said these things. And so people have got to understand that, because strangely, Freemason can have all sorts of religious belief. I mean, you could worship the devil, really, if you take it to the extremes of a supreme being. It's all sorts of things, but you can't be an atheist. And you can have any political opinion you want. You could be a communist, you could be Sinn Féin, you could be a fascist, whatever. You could be all these things. You can't discuss, but you can't be a flat earther, because you've got to say the sun is the centre of the solar system. So, but there were men who said that were very, very brave. But we've got to tell people that's what it's all about. So there were educated men in religion and science. You know.
Yeah. Really wise words. Well, Mike, thank you so much. We'll end it there. We really appreciate you coming back the second time around to answer the questions that we couldn't quite fit into last week's Young Mason Social. We really do hope to have you back again for one of your many talks, and I'm already excited. And like I said, we will hopefully get a physical encounter with you next year, where you get to take us around London and show us a few sites. We'll get a curry and we'll get a few Stellar tourists.
And solve everything. Solve all the problems of the world.
Exactly. Very much appreciate it. So from myself, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the time, and I look forward to meeting you all. Okay.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Bye.
Bye-bye.